Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
It is great to be with you, Lauren.
For those that are listening, we've got Rob Brown. He is the founder of Truest Fan Coaching, also has a podcast as well called The Purpose Focused Advisor. We were just chatting before we got going. I'm really excited to hear more about your story about how you really help others find their purpose, as we were talking about earlier, and kind of what that means, unpacking that, and specifically for the RA community, the financial service community at large. I know you've got deep experience in this world, in this space. So let's just start there. Rob, tell us a little bit about your background, and kind of how you got to doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, so a long time ago, started in the financial services industry as a financial advisor and ran my own practice for about 25 years. And while I was doing that, I had the opportunity to also be part of an executive management team
Mm.
at a fairly good-sized investment firm in Richmond, Virginia. And in that role, I was able to do a lot of coaching and mentoring of other advisors. And what I discovered is that I began to enjoy the coaching and the mentoring that I was doing more than the work that I was doing with my clients. And I said, this is probably a sign that it's time to sell your practice. And I had a great partner who acquired my share of the practice, and
Yeah.
she went off to run to work with our clients, our private clients, and I ran off to work with other advisors. She
Mm.
called it "you're running off to herd cats," and
Ah,
in some cases she was absolutely right.
yeah.
But I love being a cheerleader for this industry, in particular for financial advisors and RIAs who have such important work that they do for their clients.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. I feel like in talking with so many firms, right? It's not about the money, right? It's about what we're talking about today, more about the purpose and what have you. So tell us a little bit about that, because that's being able to break and tap into what you really enjoy, and then you made that adjustment. How did you get your coaching business going, right? And were you initially working with other advisors, or how did that all kind of come about? So,
Well, because I had been in the industry and in a leadership role, I had a lot of connections in
mhm.
the industry, which led me to do more training programs, actually for the firm that I left,
Yeah.
um, as well as some other firms that I gotten to know through some industry
Yes.
associations, and then that is just sort of morphed over the years into wanting to work more with advisors on a one-to-one
Yep.
basis. I love my private client coaching and then also doing it in small groups and roundtables where we bring groups of advisors together and work with them
Oh, that's
around a
fantastic.
common theme.
So, do you mind kind of helping us understand how you're coaching advisors? Is it, where do you start with this conversation, right? Because there's so many things that you can unpack if it's related to the business or personal or HR or all this kind of, right? Where do you start with those conversations? Or maybe what's a trigger issue that people have when they come to you as a starting place?
They're usually one of two. One is um, it's an advisor who is having success.
Hmm.
Maybe he or she is making more money, has a bigger business than they ever thought they would have.
Hmm.
But it's become too much about the numbers. And they've been kind of convinced over the years that the way that you measure success is
Yeah.
by piling on more AUM or increasing your GDC or whatever it
Hmm.
might be. And they realize, I get that, and I want to keep doing that,
Right.
but I also have some other things that are important to me in my business, and the things that I have some interest in are unattached, and I want to try to bring those together. So that's
Hmm.
kind of the first group. They've hit a plateau, and they're looking for some purpose and to share that in their
Right.
business. And then the second one is similar, but not exactly the same. It's there are just too many hours in the day, just so busy that they don't have the time or the skill set to be able to understand how they break what they're doing down in a
Yeah.
way where they're really working in their zone of genius, and the other members of their team who do some of the things that they may be micromanaging do better than they do because they have their own zone of genius.
That makes sense. Yeah, helping be able to kind of aces in their places. So, that kind of delegate or die syndrome, if you will,
Yeah.
for what's important or not. It's always a hard thing for, I think, all of us, right? So tell us a little bit more about how do you kind of unpack that why, like that purpose with advisors? Are there is it a series of questions that you take them through? Is it kind of exercises? I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you kind of help them figure out how to kind of connect the dots for with their own purpose.
Sure. It's it's hardly ever exactly the same.
That's fair. Yeah.
It starts with questions,
Okay.
but sometimes those questions are hard for advisors, business leaders, owners to answer because
Mm-hmm.
they've never stopped to really think about them
Yep.
before. And
Yep.
so, but sometimes we'll get there quickly, and there is a purpose, a stated purpose. This is what I want to do. This is how I see my business creating legacy out into the future, and we can build
Mm-hmm.
around that and figure out where they need help
Mm-hmm.
inside of their business to get there. Um,
Yes.
Other times, we go through a longer series of exercises. Maybe we'll even give up a little bit on digging too deep into why, just to be able to move forward with some opportunities to create some quick wins and some opportunities to see
Mm.
some light at the end of the tunnel in the business,
Yes.
especially for those who feel overwhelmed. And then we go back to that why question. What is, why do you do what you do? What are your biggest dreams? And then
Mm-hmm.
and then I try to dig deep because I think oftentimes just by asking somebody a question like, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get somebody to answer a question with a few, well, I see this, this, and this. And then you stop, you
Yeah.
say, huh, well, tell me more. Why
Yep.
did you say that?
Yep.
Let me repeat back to you what you just said. And then they get to really free up their mind, and they can dream and they can imagine and they
Mhm.
can begin to pull that purpose together. And then we can decide, how are we going to attack that? How are we going to make things happen in
Yeah.
your business and your life in light of that dream, in light of that purpose?
So they're tough conversations, right? I mean, you have to kind of be mentally in a place to be able to be open to that and then have the time and space. If someone were to engage in this kind of exercise, can you talk us a little bit about kind of timing? Is it there's the time is now? Is it when they're kind of like have like going through a sabbatical? Maybe they are at a transition point in their lives. There's something that's triggered them. Is there any kind of timing that you think someone should sort of look out for when would be good to make sure they've got the kind of breathing room to digest these questions and what have you.
Yeah. So the two ways that I suggested people come to me um,
Mm,
kind of show themselves
mm,
in lots of different ways,
mhm.
and so that to me creates the opening. For example,
I
somebody
see.
is
Yep.
wondering about, what's next? Why am I really doing what I'm doing?
Right.
And they're also hearing at the same time all this chatter in the industry about you have to have a succession plan, you have to
Yep.
build a legacy. That just creates that opening. And
Hmm.
for financial advisors, you would think it would be easier because those who do serious
Yes.
financial planning see this all the time with their clients is
Yeah.
they ask these big questions,
Yep.
but they don't always get the full answer.
Yes.
But they do know that sometimes a client comes to them because there's something going on in their life where they have some questions or they want some answers,
Hmm.
but they don't know exactly what the questions are, what the path is. And so
Yep.
I really think, and this is maybe sounds self-serving, you can start this process at any time, but
Yeah.
you have to be open to change and open to doing things maybe differently than you've done them before. And the end
Hmm.
result is usually after about 3 or 4 months, they'll say, why didn't I start this years ago?
Yep.
Um, because they realize that they could have made more progress and felt more fulfilled if they had just gotten an earlier start.
So as you're kind of going through this process with individuals or groups of people, and you're kind of helping to peel away like, okay, this is where, you can be your best self or you can have your sort of peak performance. You talked about those kind of micro wins, like those daily wins, for how people can take it from kind of big picture to small. Can you tell a little bit more about how do you kind of help individuals to really lean into their best self once they've figured out like, okay, this is my north, like this is my professional north, this is my personal north, and sort of like what's that next layer of kind of breaking it down to those objectives?
Right. So I use a process that I call the Truest Fan blueprints.
Hmm.
And the blueprint starts with what we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
But then we break that back into shorter periods of time. So if we're really doing some serious long-term dreaming, thinking out 10
Right.
years or more, we've got to
Right.
bring that back to maybe what's your vision for the next few years?
Yes.
For most of us, that's a more realistic time frame
Yep.
to think about.
Yep.
And so we'll set a 3-year vision where
Mm-hmm.
we'll start putting more specifics to what the advisor or the team is trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll create a 1-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then that 1-year plan gets broken down into 90-day sprints. And so
Mm.
that creates the opportunity to say, okay, I know what I need to do
Yep.
over the next 90 days that will lead to my 1-year goals, which puts me on the path to that 3-year vision, which puts
Uh-huh.
me on the path to that purpose. And then we get very tactical. We say, okay, if we've
Yeah.
got this action plan, this 90-day sprint that we're working on, let's make sure the things that we're doing are quick wins and needle movers and not just more thinking about thinking.
Yes, that makes sense. And just to clarify, is this for both the business that you build this plan out and for the personal, or is it kind of like one and the same?
It really depends on the client. I have some
Yeah.
clients who have very specific personal plans that they want to really keep very
Right.
separate from their businesses.
Right.
But in most cases, because the advisors that I'm working with are either uh, um, a solo advisor running a big practice or a few partners working
Right. Right.
together,
Right.
the two can come together.
Okay. Okay. So then, and that was kind of a follow-up question I was going to ask is when you're building these plans, are you typically doing it for an individual or for you doing it for teams, or does it just depend on the situation?
It depends on the situation, but
Yeah.
if we're working on it at a business level or a team level,
Right.
we're inevitably going to find things that different members of the team need to be focusing on to affect that goal that they're working to.
Yep.
And so at that tactical level, we may then that's probably more where we'll split things out and say you as the business owner leader really need to be focusing on this, and the other members of your team need to be focusing on these
Yep.
things, but you're working towards the same common
Yeah.
goals.
Or scoreboarded out, if you will, or yeah, interesting. So I know there's a lot of firms we work with that use EOS as a model. So when you're sort of talking about year-long, quarterly, 90-day, I sort of it sounds like you could see some parallels with that. One of the I know EOS sort of they have the VTO. I don't know how familiar you are with EOS, but kind of the vision tracker. But it sounds like a lot of the work that you're doing, which is so critical at the beginning, is really unpacking the why and the like you said, like the purpose. Like, what are we doing? What is the bigger picture? Because you can sort of storyboard and you get into the specifics without kind of looking at like, well, what is actually north? And you could be going down the path that doesn't make sense for a long time before you actually answer those tough questions, which sounds like it's a lot of the upfront value in those conversations. So.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that most of us don't do things that are purely original,
Mhm.
um, that we all learn from our experiences and other processes that we've been through is
Yes.
recreate our systems. And EOS is among many systems that I've had exposure to over the years that have helped me create my Truest Fan blueprint, which
Uh,
um, you're spot on. It's a similar system with its own with its own intricacies.
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, just from business learning and practices, right? Like, I mean, setting KPIs and what have you, breaking it down, all of that. So Interesting. So but it's really kind of like breaking down that those pieces for the advisor and where they can align their true north to make a difference. So how about, kind of once you do that, I know you talked about sort of that helps you to be able to grow faster, right? Kind of what does that look like for firms when they're sort of like, okay, we've got a good groove with things as they're moving forward. We've got these plans in place. How do you kind of track that once it starts moving forward? So they can create that growth for however that's defined for the firm.
Well, and that's the first thing we do is define what that growth looks like because growth in this industry can sometimes be very arbitrary because there are different ways that
Yeah.
advisors' practices can grow. We have had in this industry a lot of wind in our sails for several years where
Yeah.
growth can just come from the market doing better and clients' assets growing. And then you get
Hmm.
a certain level of growth. And then there are opportunities to deepen wallet share and get more opportunity to work with
Yep.
existing clients. And then the opportunity to add new clients with new assets and new opportunities. And so I like to make sure that we're looking at all three of those things.
Yeah.
And what I find is that most of my clients who um, are where growth is one of their primary drivers,
Hmm.
and for some growth is they just know it's going to be a byproduct of the other things they do. They don't even put a
Yep.
number on the board as
Yep.
to where they expect to be.
Yeah.
But those who really do want to focus tend to think of it in terms of how many new ideal clients do I want to add this year?
Hmm.
Because you can make the case that if you go up a kind of and I have a chart that shows it, but if you go up this pyramid where
Hmm.
you're working with more and more ideal clients over time, your business becomes more grows faster, becomes more successful. You're working in the places where you really want to work. So if we can create focus on growth and saying, my goal this year is to bring in, 12 new $2 million clients, one $2 million client a month, that's
Yeah.
going to give me the growth that I need on top of any growth I may get from the market or any opportunities that I may get from existing
Yeah.
clients.
Oh, yep. Nope, that makes sense. I know. And well, also just from a fulfillment standpoint, if you're working with more of your ideal clients too, right? I mean, you're probably gonna enjoy maybe the industry that they're in or their stage of life or what have you. And then that helps with the fulfillment, piece of it. And you're probably gonna do a better job at your job and then kind of just thinking full circle about it all. So, uh,
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing that it does is it helps you identify, again, if you're in that growth mode of what activities do you need to be engaged in from a marketing and sales and prospecting perspective to give you the audience that you need to be able to add whatever that goal is for those new ideal clients. So it helps you set more clear
yep.
targets.
Yep. That makes so much sense. Um, Can we talk a little bit about, client service, right? Because as a company grows, right, sometimes the client service component can sort of sag a little bit, right? Or you've got to tighten it, right? It gets more complex within the CRM or how you segment clients or what have you. I love to hear a little bit about that, how you're talking with your clients about that as they can keep that exceptional customer service or client service because that's so paramount to this industry, right? Is taking good care of people and really leaning into that human touch. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on that, what you see too.
Yeah, this is actually a big focus for me and several of my clients this year because one of the things that I came to a realization of last year, especially as I was doing the
Yeah.
podcast and talking to some advisors that I've not worked with,
Hmm.
um, there's some creativity really needed to determine, how do I really add value? I have my service model in place, I have my communication
Right.
standards in place, and my clients are taking them for granted.
Mm.
In fact, some clients don't even want to come in and see me uh, because
Yeah.
um, they think I'm just going to have that same old conversation with Rob, and he's just going to
Yeah.
tell me everything's good. And
Yeah.
it's like going to the dentist every 6 months. I know I need
Is
to do it, but if I can
do
skip
yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and one of my podcast guests, a fellow named David Brown, no relation, said
Mm.
that that's how he believes
Yeah.
we should see those client relationships. It should be like the client wants to go back to that dental appointment, to that those reviews, because there's some excitement around
Yeah.
the conversations that they're having that says,
Mm.
you as my advisor are giving me the opportunity to think even deeper and more creatively about the things that I want to do when I retire, how I can
Mhm.
get engaged in philanthropy during my lifetime and have more impact in those causes that I care about. So the review meeting is, part coming in and looking at the numbers, and then in part saying, okay, how are
Yeah.
you doing towards those things that are really important in your life to elevate those conversations?
Hmm.
And then that can turn into um, different systems for creating recurring content that helps the advisor stay in touch with that client. Again, not just on the numbers, not just with the performance reports, but around what that advisor really has grown to know about what's important to that client.
Yeah, so interesting and I think really important, right? The deeper conversations just are not the upfront, but they're adjusting as the clients moving through their own life and their particular circumstances to make sure that the questioning helps to get to line the numbers, another sort of way to say it. So, but yeah, that's I was reading actually, it was just today or last night, I can't remember. There was a Kitsis article that came out and it was talking about it was sort of flashback to 5, 6 years ago when robo advisors were the thing, right? And now AI and there's all this other stuff. And so, but it was talking about how, that kind of fear that a lot of, especially large firms had at that time has sort of faded. And I think it's because of the human element. And so it was, I think, to your point of being able to ask these deeper questions, adjusting as people are moving forward, having those human connections is so critical. So it's interesting to hear that you're leaning in on that as a component of success for firms. So,
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important. And it's just a matter of coming up with different questions because
mhm,
I think, Lauren, and I know that the way we grow in relationships is by asking questions and listening and having
mhm.
conversations. But sometimes you have to change up the question so you don't
Yep,
get the same old
yep,
answer.
yep. It's so true. It's a people business. So, um, oh my
And
goodness.
one thing that I would really suggest that advisors think about, because you mentioned the term robo advisors,
Yes, yes.
um, is I don't know if I've coined this phrase, but I've used it a lot. I
Yeah.
think too many advisors are becoming human robo advisors,
Mm,
where because they have this technology stack, particularly their
yes.
financial planning tools or their investment management tools that allow them to do their
Oh,
asset allocation, that
100%.
conversation can be all about the printout or the projection on the screen of the
Yes.
plan or the portfolio, and all they're doing is perpetuating the fact that they aren't needed as an advisor. They've become the robo advisor and they haven't done that. And so to advisors, I'd ask, have you really thought about how you are improving your client experience
Mm-hmm.
every single year?
Yep.
Because it needs to get better every
Yep.
single year.
Yep. You can't, we see that in marketing too, where we'll see this across the financial services industry, like sort of industry or space, but people think they can just buy this big cold list of contacts, and just do mass outreach, right? Without any warm conversation or taking the time or what have you. And then they spend all this money and it just kind of falls flat and they're sort of scratching their head, right? It's about relationships. It takes the time and the extra effort to be able to make it personal, to be able to make people feel noticed and heard. It goes like you can't put a number of value on that, and that's part of that customer experience. That's part of the relationships like you were alluding to. So
Yeah.
I hadn't heard it kind of like pinned that way, but you're so right. Especially with all the noise with AI this past year, all these things, so it's sort of like, yeah,
Yeah.
uh, almost too much.
Almost too much, although I would say that AI can actually help you accomplish that more personal
Yep,
contact if you use it
great.
right. But that's the thing about most tools and most new things. We've got to understand how they really work.
Yep.
And um, One of the things I always think about AI. I was talking with an AI expert a couple of years ago, and he suggested that the best way to use AI is make sure that whatever you're using it for,
Mhm.
you are the expert and you're using it to help you do what you do better. Don't go to it,
Yep.
as the expert. Maybe if you're doing some research and you're trying to gather
Hmm.
information, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I think that's where it really comes into to play.
Yeah, as a leveraging tool, but not to replace, the thinking or your voice or tone or what have you. So, um, oh my goodness. Okay, we could go on this topic for a while too. I want to be mindful of time. I'd love to hear, any a thing you want to make sure to touch on, any kind of closing thoughts or resources where folks can learn more.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I'm a huge fan of financial advisors, and uh, I love to connect with people on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time and share a lot of content there. You mentioned my podcast. I'm sure a link to that will be in the show notes.
Yep.
But if you're looking at your business, say, how do I optimize? How do I create more purpose behind what I do? We have a tool called the Business Optimization Scorecard that you can get by going to truestfan.com/scorecard. And it's just a free scorecard that you can download and do a quick look at your practice.
Oh, that's great. We'll have to make sure to include a link too. So, that's fantastic. So, well, it's been so wonderful having you, hearing a little bit more about just your background, your story. You've got such a great story about how you started and then where you are today. And appreciate you taking the time to do really deep work to help, individuals and firms really figure out their purpose and where they're going, and then map that against the day-to-day of their practice goals. So thank you again for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.